Welcome to Communion Architects podcasts. We find that there's a lot said about architecture and even a fair amount about particular architects. However, what we find is there's not an awful lot spoken about the process of design, the process of construction, and what it really means to develop and deliver a project. On this podcast, we get to talk with Peta Darnley, who has just opened Pensons restaurant for the Netherwood Estate. We've worked with Netherwood over the last 5 to 6 years in order to really consider how we could work with a range of barns that were on the estate. When we first started, the barns were really in quite a difficult condition. The roofs were falling in, the walls were being washed out, they really were on the brink of collapse, and yet they provided an opportunity to do something. At the time, we weren't really entirely sure what to do with the project. And as time went on, we looked at different options for what would really work for them, for the estate, and actually for the local community. And in the end, Peter came up with a fantastic vision for a restaurant and a series of uses that really makes the site now sing. Pensons has been brilliant. It's won all number of awards recently, and it has been fantastic in bringing the best of the local food to Herefordshire. I think that it's one of the most beautiful places in Herefordshire to eat. So during this podcast, we sat down with Peta and just had a conversation about her thoughts about the project, what inspired the project, what she really enjoys about the project, and her vision and delivery of the project. And I'm sure that you'll find it a really wonderful piece. And of course, there is also an invitation at the end to come and have a meal at Pensons, and I can't recommend that enough. Let's join Peta at Pensons talking about Pensons Restaurant.
I'm Peta Darnley. I'm the owner of Pensons Restaurant on the Netherwood Estate. We work very closely with Alex and his team at Communion to take some completely derelict farm buildings that were on the verge of collapse and create this extraordinary restaurant and entertainment space halfway between Bromyard and Tenbury on the Herefordshire-Worcestershire border.
Tell me, what was the inspiration for doing any kind of project here?
My husband and I took over a very traditional farming estate that was just focused on agriculture, and we realised that in order to be financially sustainable we would need to diversify, and we had done what one might describe as all the low-hanging fruit projects, and something we were left with was this range of completely dilapidated, rather sad buildings. Their one advantage, I suppose, was that they had completely escaped notice, so were unlisted, and they were on a road, admittedly a small B road, and we wanted to create something extraordinary with them. The easy solution probably would have been to convert them to residential, but we felt very strongly that somewhere like the Netherwood Estate historically would have been really involved with the local community and either directly or indirectly would have touched many people's lives either by employing them or through the supply chain. But with changes in modern agriculture, when we took over 12 years ago, we employed one person 2 days a week. So gradually over time, we have diversified into different things, and we thought there was an opportunity with this to create a restaurant that could be a destination and would bring people from all over the country if we made it good enough. And we felt at the heart of that proposition, we believe in this area so much, and there is so much fantastic food and drink provenance here, but there wasn't anybody really producing food at the very highest level in the restaurant. And we thought there was an opportunity to achieve that, but more broadly to also showcase the very, very best of everything that was local. Be that the architects who are from, just down the road in Hereford, the food and drink suppliers locally, growing as much as we could on the estate ourselves, but also the craftspeople that have been used in commissioning things to decorate the building with. And we wanted it to be a celebration of everything from this little corner of England.
What's been really great about working with you, Peta, is that you're creative and you've got a vision for the project as well. And you've brought so much to the project. And I remember those very early design conversations where we were looking at the barns. You had a vision of the space, but particularly about the things that you wanted to add into that space, which wasn't very much, but about the doors and the windows of that space. And I think that they are one of the key defining design elements of the space that makes the project stand out from other converted barns, of which there's quite a number. And do you want to talk about your thoughts about that and why you went for these steel windows?
When we were thinking about the building, I didn't want it to be a typical barn conversion pastiche. And in particular, I think a lot of barn conversions have huge plate glass windows with heavy oak frames, and it wasn't something that I felt was true to the origins of this particular building. There were the odd crystal window that had been left over from previous incarnations, and that really was our starting point for saying I wanted it to be true to its slightly agricultural industrial heritage, and I thought we wanted to reflect that. We didn't want to try and gentrify it too much. And where you were absolutely fantastic was taking all my tear sheets of other people's windows and reinterpreting that for something that just looks so amazing in the space. Personally, I believe that windows are absolutely critical in any building. They are the eyes of the building and what can completely bring it to life and give it a character immediately. And these windows, as you rightly say, I think define the building. Everybody comments on how amazing they are. I like to think that the manufacturers should be paying you and me a lot of commission for how many people have contacted them as a result of seeing these. But they are absolutely beautiful from the outside, but also inside. They flood the building with natural light. I think you and I both felt we wanted to retain as many of the natural and original materials as we possibly could. And the light they provide on those just fits it perfectly. And they look wonderful in the daylight, but also at night. They look really atmospheric. So for people coming to dine with us in the evening, in our cold winter's evening, it looks unbelievably inviting. And they are fantastic. And we're very grateful to you.
One of my favourite sayings is that conversation is a really good design tool. And I know that as an architect, I can only ever go so far with the design, and then I need kind of feedback. That particular feed in at that point was fantastic because it really helped define the rest of the project as well. One of my favourite spaces is up above the welcome area where we have our large triangular window, and you suddenly get a completely different view of the countryside through what is the historic timber truss. And there's almost like a museum glass case around that allows you to see out, but also you can then see back to that truss, which I think is quite an innovative use of this window system as well. And it was one of the first that they'd ever done.
Yes, in fact, when we were looking for an architect, the reason we got in touch with you originally is because we'd seen a building you designed where you had put in a triangular glass window in the apex of a barn. So it was absolutely that which caught our eye originally. I absolutely agree with you that the window is fantastic. That wonderful juxtaposition of very modern with the old. And of course, because the building had lost its roof for so long, the beams are really bleached, and so it sort of feels really natural, quite Scandi in a way. And you see the landscape through the window, which is just lovely. And at night, of course, it almost acts like a huge reflection mirror. The rest of the restaurant, the lighting is reflected in it. So it has a sort of dual purpose, and it's a wonderful design feature.
Obviously, this is a Herefordshire restaurant, and Herefordshire is known for a lot of great produce and has a heritage of that. Certainly, I feel this is one of the most beautiful spaces that you can eat in. What's been the response of your customers eating what is amazing Michelin Star food in a space that you've created?
We are great believers that in order for our guests to have the best possible experience, it isn't just about the food. Of course, that is the thing at the top of the priority list, at the top of the triangle, if you like. But we wanted to create a space which people could really enjoy eating in and would appreciate the beauty and sense of place that we together have created there. And I think they respond really well to it. On the back of the menus, we explain not only where all the food comes from, but a bit of history of the building and how we've used local artisans and craftspeople to help decorate it. And I think it just brings it to life, and it just has a holistic feel that all fits together. And it is all about this idea that, you know, we don't need to go and get things from further afield because there is so much talent and local materials here that are so beautiful in their own right.
There's a couple of key eating spaces. There's the main restaurant, which is full height and vaulted and full of light. And then there's a space that was a found space for us, and it was probably a granary space. And we worked with a structural engineer in order to keep the trust. And now we've got this very intimate roof space, which you call the private dining room. Tell us a little bit about that, because it's such an intimate space in what is otherwise a public building.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because when you and I started working on this, there was no access to that space. And we had to sort of climb up a ladder through masses of brambles and sort of break our way in through a boarded up window. You're right, it's very different to the main space, but actually it's good to have that contrast. And I think if people are coming to eat as a group and they want to have a special occasion where they're perhaps a slightly larger group and have their own space, a private party, it works really well being a slightly more intimate space. It's particularly lovely at night. We've got some metalwork light fittings that just cast beautiful shadows around the vaulted ceiling. And it also has a wonderful view. Because being on the first floor, it looks out through some more fantastic crystal doors with its own balcony to the landscape beyond, across the fields to the woods. And so it in both respects, both internally and its outlook, it's very different to the rest of the restaurant. So that gives people an opportunity to have a slightly different experience. And I think people enjoy both spaces equally.
And then, of course, as you said, actually, there was no way up to that staircase. So, you know, for me, one of the key design challenges was the staircase. And that was a lot of fun. We've got a hung steel and glass and oak staircase. And for me, those three materials really then came together in that one element.
I know it was a huge challenge for you to execute it, and it caused you, I'm sure, many hours of scratching to get the right decision. But what I felt from a client perspective is I didn't want a heavy, imposing staircase. I certainly didn't want something with a lot of balustrades, because I felt it would really intrude on the rest of the space and it would impose itself too much in what otherwise was still a very natural double height building. And where I think your solution was so clever, therefore, is by suspending it, we don't have to have any form of uprights underneath, so we're not losing any usable space. So from a business perspective, that really works. The materials you used absolutely reflect all the other materials we'd already chosen for the restaurant. So the metalwork reflects the crystal windows, the wooden treads are the same as the wooden flooring we've used throughout, the oak flooring, and then the glass just means that it seems to float and therefore sits very lightly in that space. And I think it's a huge success. You barely notice it, and yet it is really functional, and when you do realise, you think it's incredibly clever. Well, I love a bit of architectural cleverness in building.
And then I think, you know, what is part of the total architectural experience is your attention to detail. So the cloth of the upholstery of the seats that you sit on, and the knives and the forks that you use. I mean, they're amazing. Tell us more about that.
The whole idea of this was that we needed to keep it as local as possible wherever we could, because we wanted it to be this celebration of localism in the best possible way. Not myopic, but just celebrate the very best of here. I'm also a great believer that when you're designing something, anything you touch has to be really good quality, because that just gives you so many quality cues, just generally, subliminally. So therefore, a door handle really matters, a tap really matters. We were fortunate to have this pool of local artisan talent we could draw upon. So we have someone who runs an incredible weaving mill in our farmyard. So he has woven every piece of fabric we've used, be those the chair and sofa covers or the napkins, he has woven, in the farm buildings half a mile away. And the linen napkins, for example, were woven on a loom from 1890. He said never again. We know that it has all come from right here. The steak knives were made by a blacksmith who's our immediate neighbour. He's an incredibly talented knife smith, if that is a word. The handles of them are made from a walnut tree that fell down beside our house. And so he's incorporated that, and everything has got a story behind it. And that just makes it, I think it gives it a sense of authenticity. The whole building and everything in it is really true to itself. Obviously, when you're converting a building, you need to make it fit for purpose for whatever your end use will be. And that really matters. But in order for it to retain its sense of soul, you need to slightly let the building talk to you and recognise in it where its beauty lies, really. Because I think if you are able to retain as much as that as possible or practicable, then you will always have that sense of narrative about what the building was like, and that will make it a much more interesting space to live and work in than it would be if you stripped everything out. So wherever possible, we obviously worked with you to try and reuse as many of the original materials as we could. Obviously, everything was in the most appalling condition. We didn't throw anything away, did we? We had the most enormous sort of private reclamation yard whilst we were doing this. Everything was kept. And as the building works developed, things would just become apparent where we could reuse them. So the elm boards that had originally been on the large cart shed doors, for example, are now cladding on a staircase wall. And I love their patina and the fact that they have got so much weathered age to them. And yes, they've got, a bit of woodworm hole, and in places there's bits broken off, but that doesn't matter. That just adds to the character and beauty of it. We lifted all the freshing floor bricks, which was a monumental undertaking. Obviously, we then had to dig down, do all the underpinning because there weren't any foundations, put in the underfloor heating, but then relay what we could salvage that now forms this beautiful reclaimed freshing floor as it was before, tightly packed, just bedded down on sand and lime. And it means that as you arrive, you have an immediate sense of what that space was before, but completely reimagined as a modern, just beautiful entrance hall, and it just works perfectly. And I think if we had got rid of all that and just put down some slabs from wherever, we would have really lost something.
And there's a North American Indian saying which is use every part of the buffalo, and that's what sort of came to me when I was working on this building, which, as you said, nothing was thrown away. And I think it's almost that classic museum aesthetic where, you take something that looks really gnarled and beaten, and you put it on a white wall, and suddenly it shines out. And, those bricks work like that, and those boards, which, the bricks, you could see that there was some quality, but those boards, you didn't immediately look at those boards and go, well, these are valuable, but you were brilliant in we're not throwing it away.
It's a difficult balance to achieve, and I think that's where between us we've worked together to get the right balance, because you don't want it to look like a sort of theme park, didn't want it to look like a sort of, agriculturally themed pub, and yet we wanted to retain all the natural beauty of the materials that were used there originally. And therefore, obviously, the lower walls are the original stone, now completely redone with the lime mortar so that they're breathable. The beautiful bricks above with the air vents, and all the really ancient 15th century, 16th century beams that are there. And it just means the whole thing has a narrative that really works, and it gives it a cohesion that means we're then able to put in a very modern staircase without the two jarring, because actually it gives you a lovely juxtaposition between the two. There's enough, the bones of the building are still there, that give you the basis to build on with everything else.
I love the words that you're using about the feeling. Spaces are to be experienced, and that's the only way sometimes you can describe them. I think it would be wonderful to talk about Robert's input on this project as well. So the landscape architect is now resident at Pensons, his office here, and that's Robert Myers Associates, so Robert and Claire. And they really have set the building in the most beautiful landscape. And that includes from whenever you drive in, to the courtyard, to the gardens. So that's such a part of the space as well, isn't it, Peter?
Yes, we were incredibly lucky. Robert and Claire Myers, who are some of the best landscape architects in the country at the moment, bought into the project very early on in a very personal way by taking a risk and deciding they wanted to relocate their design studio here when their new studio didn't even have a roof and just had a lot of, sort of 4 feet of 50-year-old sheet muck piled up in it. So they really bought into the vision. And what was so fantastic about their involvement is the fact that they very much worked with us and understood the vision that we had been thinking about for some years at that point, and helped therefore bring together the outdoor space with the indoor. And I think their design, it has a very light touch, using very natural materials, but it fits perfectly with the aesthetic that you had created for the building, and just sets it in its environment really well, shows it off to the best effect. I think particularly the car park, and it's a funny thing to talk about car parks because that is obviously a very functional thing, but I gave them a brief that we wanted it to be an edible car park, so that as you arrived you immediately understood that you were somewhere where aesthetics really mattered and that tied into the fact that this was a restaurant. And I think it's an area that people often don't think about, or think about last, by which time you've always run out of money. But they have created a space which, although still in its infancy, over time, I think just sets the scene for the rest of the building as you arrive, and that's really important.
I remember standing there with you and seeing the landscape forcibly being flattened out in order to create this space, which looked huge at the time. But, with Robert and Claire's skill, it is settled in the wider landscape. That is a design feat in its own right. I think a couple of more points, Peter. I mean, we always on this podcast like to talk about the journey, because doing a building project is not a 45-minute TV episode. It's not easy. We know that this one wasn't easy. And not that I want to go into it all, but it's been open now, we're in our second year, and your overall reflections on, if you were talking about developing or someone else developing a project like this, what would your sort of advice be about going through that whole design, planning, construction, realisation, running process? I mean, it's a monster, isn't it?
It is a monster, but I can't help myself. I love a building project. I think, as we both know, we had a bit of a stop-start situation with this. And actually, in hindsight, that was really useful, because I think our ideas evolved because we weren't able to start. We didn't even go for planning permission when we originally intended to. We waited for a few years, and definitely, therefore, our vision for what we're going to do with it evolved in that period. And I think that would be my first piece of advice. If you can, take some time, really think it through a lot. Don't rush into anything. Spend a lot of time in the building before you make any hard and fast decisions about what you're going to do with it. We're back to what I was saying about, I think a space will speak to you and it will become clear how it would best be transformed. Like all building projects, it always takes much longer than you think. And if you really want it to end up as in the best possible way, I think that does take a bit of to and fro, a little bit of debate in the nicest possible way. If you're not happy with something, I think you need to say that you're not. And if something starts to be built and you go, oh my God, you then have to have a frank conversation with your architect about, is this right, and trust their view. Or if you think you're going to regret it forever, then it is better to take a step back and undo it. But it should be a collaboration, and like any sort of good relationship, there needs to be a healthy amount of debate. An architect can't work in a vacuum. They've got to understand your point of view as a client and what really matters to you. Likewise, as a client, you are employing their expertise. So you need to trust them sometimes when they say, no, you've got that wrong, it needs to be like this. then you need to trust them too. It's got to be a balanced relationship, and hopefully, like us, you end up friends at the end of it. But it's always got to be worth doing, however scary a project is at the beginning. I think the end result of creating something, particularly a big renovation project when something has been particularly run down or derelict, that transformation of where you end up, I get pleasure from this every single time I see it, which is every day. Yes, it's wonderful. I'm very proud of what we've achieved.
You know, I'm proud of it as well. And I think sometimes the harder the journey, the sweeter the destination when you get there. One of the key values about architecture is the actual experience of the space, and the architect's work finishes when the vision gets going, as it were. So tell us, Peter, in terms of the restaurant, I know that you've won a few awards. So tell us about the success of the project.
It's more than the sum of the parts, really, and it's everything working together to create an experience for our guests. So we opened in January 2019. We are very fortunate to have been awarded a Michelin Star in October, 9 months later. We're the only restaurant in the whole of Herefordshire, Worcestershire and Shropshire to have one, so we are doubly honoured by that, although with that comes a certain pressure about needing to maintain one's standards all the time. We're growing so much ourselves and creating a garden around the restaurant from scratch. And you see the chefs out picking herbs and vegetables before every service. You see the fresh vegetables coming into the kitchen every morning. And it just feels that our sort of vision for it being completely rooted and having a sense of place is absolutely true to itself. I get a lot of satisfaction from the compliments that people pay us, not just about our food and the drink, but from the environment that they're eating in and everything that's been created here. And we also have the most fantastic team. And this isn't about me at all. This is about the team that works here and puts everything into ensuring that everything is as good as it can be for every service. And it really is a team effort, you know, right from the outset when we work with you, right through to my team that's here now. And, you know, all credit to everybody involved. And I hope people continue to enjoy coming for a long time to come.
We're just coming out of the COVID experience, which has been, you know, well, the hospitality industry has been the hardest hit. So it's what's fresh? What are you offering in terms of the food and the menu? Come on, tell us why people want to come and eat in this fantastic space.
You're right. It's been a strange time for everybody. Someone put it very well to me the other day. They said, we've all been in the same storm, but we've been in different boats. And I think that's absolutely right. Having been closed through government closure for 4 months, we have been blown away by how supportive everyone has been locally since we reopened 10 days ago. Not just our regulars, but lots of people who've never been to us before are coming to see what we're about. I think we kept communicating during lockdown, and we did various initiatives to do with the local community. And that's been really beneficial, being able to continue relationships with customers even though we couldn't be open. But now we've reopened, obviously a completely different season. So we closed in March, reopen middle of July. That's an entirely different period of the year, and because all our food is about being as seasonal as possible, everything on the menu is entirely different to what it was before. So on any one day we probably have about 50 different ingredients on the menu from the garden. Our head chef, Chris Simpson, is phenomenal, nationally recognised chef. He's particularly wonderful with fish. We get fresh fish from Cornwall every day, but it's being paired with really wonderful ingredients like broad beans and peas from the garden. He's got a lamb dish on at the moment that has got courgettes and what he's calling green sauce. Green sauce is his way of saying an incredibly delicious, full of flavour, sophisticated herb sauce, but he's so modest he just calls it a green sauce. And then for dessert at the moment we have amazing Herefordshire cherries. For anyone who doesn't know them, get out there quickly before the season's over. They are the biggest, juiciest, most delicious cherries out there. So everything we've got is sourced really locally and could not be fresher or more full of flavour.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for all your time. Thank you for working with us. It's been quite a journey, quite amazing, and it's fantastic actually to sit here and just spend a little bit of time talking about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you too. We are so grateful for everything you have helped us achieve here, and of course we're working on the next project now, so onwards.
It was so enjoyable to sit down with Peter after being through so much, imagining, developing and delivering the project, to have some time to sit down and discuss what the experience has become in terms of the building and the restaurant. I really loved Peter's vision for the project. She was a fantastic client in that respect, in terms that she had a really strong vision of what she looked to develop. What was also really great was the relationship that we developed over time in terms of how ideas grew in our minds and how we worked together with an incredible team of consultants and contractors to deliver the overall project. There is something so special about Pensons, and I think part of it is because the building speaks of its history and the landscape that it still finds itself in. So much of the enjoyment of a restaurant is about the space that you're sitting in. And it is really fantastic to sit in a distinctive Herefordshire space and enjoy fantastic Herefordshire produce cooked amazingly. So if you get an opportunity, book, go, really enjoy the space, really enjoy the food. I know that it will be fantastic. Thank you for listening.